What is up, NFL fans, and welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Around. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach KT Smith. We got a lot to talk about, Coach. What's going on?
Yeah, we had our show set, and then right before the show started, we had a little bit of breaking news, man. So let's go. Let's dive right in.
Well, I'll let you do it. Go ahead and say what's going on around the NFL.
Right. So the Chicago Bears are finalizing a deal to hire Ben Johnson, the Lions offense coordinator, as their head coach. That is a big deal because he is probably the most sought after candidate on the head coaching circuit this offseason. And it didn't take him long, did it?
No, it did not. And the Lions, obviously, their season ends in that wild game. We'll talk about that here in a second against the Commanders. But does this surprise you? I know the Raiders were in the mix as well. There were a lot of people in that Raiders camp that thought that Ben Johnson was going to Las Vegas. I have to think that the Chicago Bears situation is a better situation. Don't you agree?
Yeah, if you're not superstitious, right? If you don't believe that there is a curse over that franchise,
right.
It is certainly preferable to LA, which is, or not LA, Vegas, I should say, which has had plenty of instability and upheaval over the years. They don't have a quarterback in Vegas. That's, I think, the thing that if you're an offensive-minded head coaching candidate, you want to make sure that you've got a pretty good quarterback situation. Caleb Williams had an up and down rookie year, but I think that there's a feeling that under the right tutelage, he certainly has all the skills to be an exceptional NFL quarterback. You have a great receiving core there, good running back, good tight end. They've got pieces on that offense. And now the news that he's going to bring in Dennis Allen, the former Saints head coach, as his DC. Dennis Allen's had a lot of success in that capacity. And it feels as though the foundation is there for Ben Johnson to have success in Chicago.
So, you said that, the Raiders don't have a quarterback, which, hey, I get it. They don't. Some might say that they have questions about Caleb Williams. And because if Ben Johnson, who everyone's toting as the next offensive mastermind in the National Football League, if he goes there and it doesn't pan out, well, what's the issue? Is it the quarterback, or do you think Caleb Williams has the potential to actually be a superstar, or do you think that's kind of a little lofty for him after 1 year?
I think he has the potential there. He was the number one pick for a reason because teams saw his ceiling, which is exceptionally high. You contrast that to Vegas. What's that roster offer in terms of quarterbacks? Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, Spencer Rattler, or Desmond Ridder, I should say.
Yeah.
It's unappetizing. Where at least with Caleb Williams, if you're Ben Johnson and you bet on yourself and you believe that you can get him right, then his potential is tremendous.
Where the hell did this Ben Johnson guy come from? Like, I don't know much about him. I know he was the offensive coordinator in Detroit, and I know he was a hot commodity last season. He chose to run it back with Detroit this year. And now he says, okay, it's my turn. And he takes a head coaching job. You might not know the answer, but I don't know. Where did he come from?
He started in the college ranks. He kind of worked his way up, a couple college gigs, came into the NFL as I think he was a wide receivers coach at his first stop. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that was right. Worked his way up really just sort of through the position groups. I just had this conversation with a fellow coach today. We were both saying that you make your bones as a position group coach. That's where you first learn how to command a group and to earn the trust of players and to have them see you as an authority on a thing. And then you generally move up from there. I'm always very wary of hiring coaches who have not been position group coaches. It's almost like the way you'll know this as a former educator, how you feel about administrators who haven't been in the classroom in forever, right? If you haven't commanded a classroom, how can you command others who command classrooms, right? So right. I love the position group route because I think it's the most pure coaching that there is.
Quick side note, I once had a college professor who went all the way through to get his doctorate, and the only actual teaching he did was student teaching. He never taught a day in the classroom. And it's like, well, how are you supposed to tell me what to do? You've never done it yourself.
Yeah, and unfortunately in academia, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, so interesting news. We'll see what the Bears do. We'll see if Ben Johnson approaches the offseason a little bit different as it pertains to their draft order. What do they do with their draft picks? this is just the beginning of that. We'll talk about that in the coming weeks. But let's talk about what I thought was a wild and highly entertaining divisional round of football on Saturday and Sunday. Coach, the number one topic is who had the most impressive win of the weekend, in your opinion?
It's got to be those Washington Commanders, man. I mean,
that game, man,
boy,
it was something
did
else.
they turn some heads with that one. And that was actually the topic of my Call Sheet Daily podcast yesterday, which was sort of asking the question of, like, how did we get here with the Commanders? It's a fascinating story. I think the thing about Washington is they're playing like a team with a short memory, meaning like they're not really looking in that rearview mirror. You know, Mike Tomlin loves his sayings, and one of the Tomlinisms I like is, you know, big windshield, small rearview mirror. Washington's out. They're 4-13 last year. There's no looking back. It's a whole new regime. It's a whole new group of players, and they're a forward-thinking group. And you know they are because they out Dan Campbell on fourth downs. Man, they were super aggressive and incredibly successful. If you count the 1 4th down that they earned by a defensive penalty, they went 4 for 5 on fourth downs in that game. And every one of those drives then ended in a touchdown. And that wound up really being the difference in the game.
Jared Goff in the first half just looked, it was atrocious. It was awful. And people, you know, I know Lions fans are like, oh, that should have been a flag on the interception return for a touchdown, which he got popped. Yes, he did. And next, you know, Teddy Bridgewater is the quarterback of the Lions in a divisional round playoff game. But still, that has to be the most impressive win. But I want to give kudos to the Buffalo Bills too, because the Buffalo Bills, that was not an easy task. It took Lamar Jackson turning it over on more than one occasion, 3 total turnovers on the night. Mark Andrews, probably a career worst game for him. I want to give credit to Buffalo because that was not an easy win. Not that I'm not taking anything away. The Commanders is the answer, in my opinion. But I do want to give some props to the Buffalo Bills. They hold serve at home. Lamar Jackson and company. And what a game that was. Like, as exciting as the Lions game was, that came down to a 2-point conversion, and Mark Andrews drops the football. It was a perfectly thrown ball. It should have been caught. He probably catches it 9 out of 10 times, and the Ravens are going home early again. Coach, what was your take on that game Sunday evening?
My take on that was it's going to be a long off season in Baltimore because the expectation level was high. Baltimore had some struggles at midseason, but they appear to be peaking. That two-headed monster of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson looked unstoppable. And then they go and again in the postseason, they play a poor game. They are their own worst enemy. They did it last year in the AFC Championship game. They've done it repeatedly throughout the Lamar Jackson era, just not playing their best football in the postseason. You got to play. You can't play average or mediocre or below the line football in the postseason. You're going to lose. It's the best teams. And Baltimore, year in and year out, has one postseason clunker that ends their season. And so it's going to be, I think, an offseason of some soul searching there in Baltimore.
It's a step backwards. They hosted the AFC Championship game last season. They don't even get there this season. I don't think there's anyone out there that's a Ravens fan that is saying that this could be deemed a successful season. No, they had issues and they seemed to right the ship, but ultimately it's a step backwards. There's no other way around it. And they have to be sick to their stomach for a second straight year. And I don't see a lot of roster turnover. Like Derrick Henry's still under contract. Lamar's under contract. Not like they have some huge decisions to make, but man, that for as much credit as you give to Buffalo, the Ravens have to look at this game and their fans and have to think, we choked that one away. You agree with that sentiment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, can I circle back to a point you made a minute ago about Jared Goff on that interception return?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a penalty. How is the quarterback a defenseless player once an interception has happened? If you say the quarterback is defenseless, what you're saying is the quarterback is incapable of defending himself as a football player. He doesn't have the ball in his hands. He's one of 22 dudes on the field. He's got the opportunity. If he lays out, if he absolutely comes flying across and lays out the guy who intercepted it, it's not a penalty on the quarterback. I mean, it's a tackle. It's a normal football play. So he can hit anybody on the field as hard as he can, but he can't be hit, even though he doesn't have a ball in his hand. That's absurd. I thought that statement, he's a defenseless player, was an insult to the game of football.
I agree 100%. And I also have to think that Jared Goff is a veteran. Don't be stupid. If you threw a pick, you've got 3 commanders protecting the guy with the football. Just let him go. You're not going to make the tackle. Why would you even have to get yourself in that scrum? I know that some people, they like the gusto. They like I'm going to go and make that play for my. You're not making that play. It's like a defensive lineman or a linebacker coming right at you full speed. Get the hell out of the way. Like, what are you doing? I don't understand what Jared Goff was thinking. Then again, there's a lot of things that Jared Goff did in the first half that I don't know what the hell he was thinking. For every criticism I had of Jared Goff that I felt like, man, I'm having to eat crow after all these years, the past 2 years of success, it all came back. It all came back. And you look at, and I don't want to jump the gun, but let's go there. Let's go here. Let's go to our next topic. Speaking of losses, where does the 15-2 Detroit losing at home as a 9.5-point favorite to a Washington team that went 4-13 last season rank in terms of recent NFL playoff upsets? Can you think of any bigger?
Yeah. So, in consideration of this question, I had to go back and look and say, all right, what have been some of the big upsets?
Yeah.
And I think a pretty good comp is if you go back to 2019, the Ravens, 14-2 regular season. They earned the bye. They're the number 1 seed in the AFC. And it feels like they've got, a great path to the Super Bowl, and a 9-7 Tennessee team, which incidentally, Derrick Henry is their running back at the time, comes into Baltimore. And they didn't just beat the Ravens. They thumped the Ravens 28-12 in that game. That came as a huge shock because, again, man, that felt like the best team Baltimore had since their Super Bowl run a few years prior. So I think that, there's a comp there. Detroit, they rest their players. They get a bye, or I'm sorry, they have some time to prepare. They get the bye week. They come out. They don't play their best game. They're a little rusty. They play a got nothing to lose team like the Commanders. You could feel it start to tighten up. The veteran quarterback is off. It's eerily similar to some of those things that have plagued the Ravens at times in the postseason.
I think, and this is just an outsider's perspective, I think the Lions are drinking some of their own Kool-Aid. You win that Week 18 game on Sunday Night Football. You earn yourself the number 1 seed. You earn yourself the bye week. I think they came out in the divisional round. They looked flat. I think there's something to a team like the Commanders that has to earn their way in, and they just keep it rolling. I don't think that every team, obviously we'll talk about Kansas City here in a second. I don't think every team can handle the rust aspect. You talked about this, I think, last week, didn't you, Coach? How the veteran leadership of Kansas City is going to keep them in it, and they're going to be locked in. They'll be fine. I don't know if Detroit was. They weren't buttoned up to start that game, and it ended up turning them in. I think the bye hurt the Lions in the long run. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think the bye coupled with the maturity aspect of it all, you mentioned them not being totally focused. They kind of got into some stupid beefs with some of the Commanders guys. There was a general feeling that this big spread, this 9.5-point spread, was going to be easy for them to cover. I mean, all the Vegas money was on Detroit. It just, you felt like the Lions were crowning themselves before they'd earned the right to be crowned.
Yeah, and the Commanders smacked them right in the face. Our buddy Pez, and he was on your podcast as well. Boy, did his picks suck this week. I think he went 0-2-1.
Yeah, man. I think a lot of people lost picks this week because, again, you got a couple games in there that were tricky spreads. Those big spreads, man. That makes you nervous in the postseason, right? 6, 8.5, 9.5, and then it's basically a toss-up game between Baltimore and Buffalo. I'm not a bettor to begin with, but even if I was, this would have been a tough weekend for me to try to put money on.
Well, I said that the spread in this Washington-Detroit game was too much for me to ever throw money on, but I did say hammer the over, and I think they hit that before halftime. So I think it was like 51.5.
Oh, it wasn't boring, man. It was not boring.
There are some purists out there that are mad that there was not a lot of defense, but if you like defense, just look away. But let's go to the game that you talked about as a toss-up game, the Buffalo and the Baltimore game. we want to talk about MVP here. You asked the question as you gave the topic of how does this loss impact Lamar Jackson's MVP campaign? Is it over? What does the playoff failure have to do to his legacy? Let's talk about MVP first, because now everyone's saying, well, it's Josh Allen. I'm going to say something before you go, and maybe this is what you're going to say. Can we bring up Saquon Barkley again? Can we have that discussion? Because I saw Josh Allen and he was great, played good football, and Lamar Jackson's electrifying, and we know this because he's been that way and he's won 2 MVPs already. But I watched Saquon Barkley, and he is the Eagles' offense. He is it. If he's gone, they suck. I mean, they're not even close to being in the championship game, which they're going to be this coming Sunday. I think that if we're just talking about the MVP, it's not going to happen. But I think Saquon Barkley deserves a ton of respect in that regard. What are your thoughts?
100%, man. And he's not going to win it because he's not a quarterback. But if I had a vote, I'd vote for Saquon Barkley. Because you're right. You watch the Eagles offense. It's 2-yard run, a 3-yard run, a 4-yard run, a 2-yard run, a 70-yard, like he's just a monstrous play waiting to happen. Yeah. If he gets to the third level, I haven't seen a safety tackle him ever. I mean, if he breaks the linebacker level, forget it. It's over. I can't understand how teams continue to blitz the hell out of the Eagles. I mean, obviously they're trying to pressure Jalen Hurts, but if you hand the ball off against the blitz and Saquon Barkley breaks the first line of defense, he's in the end zone.
Yeah.
I mean, he just has been so dynamic. If you take him out of that offense, right, where are they? That's really, to me, is the question that you have to ask when you're considering MVPs. Take this guy out of the offense, where are they? And that's why quarterbacks get all the votes, because you know that the backup is a massive drop-off. And it's usually not as true with a running back. But in Philly, yeah, man, take Barkley out. There's no way they're in the NFC Championship game.
No, not even close. And we saw Kenny Pickett have to come in during the season, regular season, mind you, and he was able to move the offense. Why? Because Saquon Barkley was there. And when Saquon Barkley's there, a defense can't, they have to play the run, and they have to respect that aspect of the offense. And that offensive line, too, they are just a bunch of maulers. Like, they're fun to watch. And typically you don't watch the offensive line, you just follow the football. When I watch the Eagles, I tend to watch the offensive line because whether it's Lane Johnson, honestly, they lost Jason Kelsey, and it doesn't seem like they miss him at all. I mean, maybe with the tush push, because that's a different story. But let's talk about the MVP for the quarterbacks: Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. Everyone's assuming it's going to be those two quarterbacks. Well, what does the loss in Buffalo affect? How does that affect Lamar's? If he's putting together a campaign for MVP, how does that affect it?
He can't be the MVP. He can't be the MVP.
I agree.
They lost 6 games, and they didn't make it to the AFC Championship. I don't care what his numbers are. That's not an MVP season. If you're the quarterback and the most important guy in the stir that's, the straw that stirs the drink, et cetera, et cetera. If he wins the MVP, it'll be his 3rd MVP award. Nobody in the history of the league has won 3 MVPs and never made it to the Super Bowl. And that would become Lamar Jackson's designation there. It just, he played poorly, man, all things considered, or he certainly didn't play well enough to win in a game where Josh Allen played fine, but wasn't like out of his mind great. I mean, that was a winnable game for Baltimore, and Lamar Jackson didn't get it done. And I don't know how you can look at that along with the fact that they lost 5 other games during the regular season and say he's the MVP.
When you talk about these individual accolades, a lot of times it's like, okay, well, what kind of quarterback do you want? If we're going the quarterback route, we already talked about Saquon Barkley. Do you want the Dan Marino type that's going to light up the stat sheet, but he's not going to play best in the big games? Or do you want a Terry Bradshaw type who has moments in the regular season where he looks like a backup, but when the game is the biggest is when he steps up and makes the biggest plays? Personally, I would rather have the latter. I want a guy that's going to play big in big games. And Lamar Jackson has proven time and time again, he is not capable of doing that. And call it blasphemy, say that I'm a Steeler fan and I hate the Ravens. That's factual. I do hate the Ravens. But I'm also on this show trying to keep it even keel 100%. And I just can't fathom how a Ravens fan can sit there and say, yeah, we're fine when Lamar Jackson throws a god-awful interception and fumbles another play. He fumbles the ball. And he took ownership for it. I'll give him credit. He stood up in front of the media and said, it's on me. I got to hold on to the damn ball. But I don't know. Like Josh Allen, if he can win in Kansas City next weekend, I think the MVP's his. You agree with that?
100%. Yeah, he gets to the Super Bowl. It's a lock. If he
Yeah.
doesn't, and the Eagles go to the Super Bowl, you got to give a lot of consideration to Saquon Barkley.
I don't know why people are so resistant to it. Like, if you watch this season, he rushed for over 2,000 yards. If he played in week 18, he would have broken Tony Dorsett's record. He is lighting it up in the playoffs. Like, what? I don't know what else people would want from a guy who's considered the most valuable player for their team. I don't know. That's neither here nor there. We'll see how these playoffs pan out.
Saquon Barkley, by the way, in 2 games against the Rams this year, Saquon Barkley rushed for, ready?
Yeah.
451 yards.
I knew it was close to 5. I knew
That's
it was close to 5.
451 yards.
And he had those back-breaking runs in both of those games. If you think back to in LA, it was right after halftime when Sean McVay's like, we just need to get a stop and we'll get the ball back. And Saquon Barkley is just, I think, 70 yards right down the gut, touchdown. And in the second half, he did it again to him. He did it again in the snow. It was entertaining, to say the least. All right. Topic number 4. This is my favorite part. It's tinfoil hat time. If I had one, I'd put it on my head right now. All right, so there were several questionable calls, that's putting it lightly, in the Houston-Kansas City game that went the way of the Chiefs. Shocker. Including 2 hits on Patrick Mahomes that seemed especially suspect. Both penalties extended drives that resulted in points for the Kansas City Chiefs. Where do you stand on this well-worn path that suggests the league is in the bag for Kansas City? Before we even go down this rabbit hole, and I love doing this, I'm all for it. My question for you, and I don't know if this is factual, do they not have replay assist with some of these calls?
That's a good question. I don't know what the boundaries of replay assist are.
I'm curious to that as well. Maybe we need to look it up.
We should look that. We got to find that out. Because you're right. That's clearly the one from Will Anderson is not helmet-to-helmet contact. Clearly.
Is that the one where he hits his teammate?
No, that's the second one, which might have even been worse. But the one with Will Anderson, where Will Anderson gets flagged for pass or roughing the passer on a 3rd down that would have forced a punt, Will Anderson's helmet hits Mahomes in the shoulder pad.
Yes,
and they rule it a helmet-to-helmet hit. That could have been overturned easily on assist. And that drive then, of course, culminates in a Kansas City touchdown.
I will say this. This is not just about Patrick Mahomes. This is about the Chiefs. Let's make that very clear. I don't care which game you're watching. You could have watched any of their regular season games. The playoffs doesn't matter. And you get these calls where it looks like a 3rd down stop. There's a flag on the play. And it's this, oh my gosh, a phantom defensive holding call in the secondary. New set of downs, move the chains, and they end up turning it into points. It happens all the time. Patrick Mahomes, I will say this again, I have no dog in the fight here. He is a crybaby. But he does it to a point. He's always in the ears of the officials. He's telling them that guy hit me late, he hit me high, or he hit me below the legs or below the knee, whatever. He is doing everything in his power to keep the officials looking at him and making sure, and he's selling this stuff too. So the NFL would have to say, we got to make sure we were calling it fair. I guess my biggest beef is that when you watch other games around the league, doesn't matter what team, other games you see quarterbacks get hit like Jared Goff, but just in the pocket, and they don't flag it. You saw Joe Burrow on 2 separate occasions in game-clinching plays staring out of his ear hole because he got face masked so hard, and there's no flag. This is when me, tinfoil hat wearer Jeff, I am just fuming because now it's not even. It's not fair. This is not being called the same way. That's where I've got beef. But, Coach, I'll let you talk about it.
I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theory guy. I don't think there's anything being orchestrated by the league office here. Hey, we got to keep the, Chiefs in the playoffs because they're great for the ratings. By the way, did you see the ratings for that game? They were monstrous for that Chiefs-Texans game. The best of the entire weekend. I guess all the Swifties are back now for the playoffs.
Well, Saturday's numbers were actually down from a year ago. From a Saturday, all the games. But yeah, go ahead.
The reason I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy is because people suck at keeping secrets. You got kind of orchestrated conspiracy. Everybody's got to be on board, and everybody's got to get their story in line and shut up. And that just doesn't happen. But I think a much more realistic explanation is that the referees are intimidated by the Chiefs, and that they make calls in their favor because the Chiefs are really good at kind of putting their foot on the neck of the referees, so to speak. I've seen it happen a million times just as a high school coach. I won't say his name, but there's a veteran coach in our area who's an unbelievably successful guy, got more wins than any coach in South Jersey history. And if it's a tight game, the moment he starts chirping, there's going to be a call that will go in his favor because he leans on the refs and they feel the weight of that pressure. Hey, this is Coach so-and-so, and they bow to it. And I think that happens a lot. And I also think there's a concerted effort to protect Patrick Mahomes because Mahomes, does cry about it, does make officials aware of it. And, he's the golden goose for the league, man. And so just like in other sports, there have been sort of separate rules for certain players. I think Patrick Mahomes gets that treatment.
All right. So you're right. I want to read. I looked it up on the NFL's official website, the NFL Football Operations. Here's what it says about replay assist. The new assistance rule applies to plays where there is clear and obvious video evidence to proactively address specific objective rulings, such as a spot of the ball or a foul, complete or incomplete pass, and touching of the ball or a line. So penalty enforcement, confirmation of the proper down, spot of a foul, game clock administration, possession of a loose ball. But it does say that penalty enforcement. So they continue. For the 2024 season, the NFL Competition Committee expanded replay assist to include objective input on roughing the passer, late hits out of bounds, and intentional grounding. So in 2024, the Competition Committee actually put in place that the replay assist should be able to step in and say, guys, like, you missed it. Like, we can't do this. Like, we gotta set it straight. But this, to me, is very much like when the NFL tried for one season to have pass interference be a challengeable call. And what happened? It never got overturned. They would challenge it and it never got overturned because they didn't want to show up the officials. Just like this year, how many hip drop tackle penalties have been called? Anyone know? 0. Not one. Because they put it in place because it's going to look good and it's going to sound good from an administrative standpoint, but they're never going to use it. So even though it is there for these purposes, they're not using it. I don't understand it. But I just think that the NFL, if they want to do themselves a favor, and we've talked about officiating a lot on this podcast, use the replay assist to get it right more than you do get it wrong. And after the game, they had pool reporters being able to talk to the head official, who I don't know his name off the top of my head. And they asked him some well, what did you see? And he goes, he felt like he got hit in the head and he's just saying what he saw. That's where replay assist comes in. So coach, replay assist should have helped with this.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they can tweak it so that it's a challengeable offense. You can throw the red flag and now challenge that. But you're right. I think that a big part of it is they don't want to show up the refs. You don't want to constantly be overturning these calls because now you're discrediting the referees. And and their qualifications get called into question, et cetera.
Yeah. So the freaking Chiefs are going to host the Buffalo Bills. And I've never been a Buffalo Bills supporter myself, but I am this weekend. I'll tell you that right now.
So I think everybody outside of the greater Kansas City area and every non-Swiftie is a Buffalo Bills fan. The country has turned against the Chiefs.
They have. Absolutely. They have. And I saw a funny map. It said who fans are rooting for across the nation. And it was on the left side for AFC, it was all Buffalo except for one little circle in Kansas City. And then for the NFC, it was all Commanders except for one little blot in Philly. Probably is that way. So let's talk about our next topic. According to models generated by The Athletic, the Eagles are the most likely to win the Super Bowl with a 34% chance, followed by the Chiefs at 30, the Bills at 26, and the Commanders at 10. Is that how you'd rank the remaining 4 teams in terms of their chances to win?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'd give Philly the best chance to win the Super Bowl, but I think they have the best chance to get to the Super Bowl. I think they're going to be the bigger favorite.
Yeah.
The Buffalo Kansas City game is pretty much a toss-up. If Washington got to the Super Bowl, they'd be the most unlikely Super Bowl team in all of football history.
Probably.
Because The worst team, the team with the worst record the previous season to reaching the Super Bowl was the 2000 New England Patriots. They went 5-11 in 2000 and then were in the Super Bowl the next year. Washington was 4-13 last year. Plus, no team has ever even made it to the Super Bowl with a rookie starting quarterback. So if you throw on their record from a season ago, plus the rookie quarterback angle, they are unquestionably the least likely, would be anyway, least likely Super Bowl participant. Which, now, all that said, I will not be shocked if they win. I mean, can anybody say that they'd be shocked right now if Washington won? Surprised, maybe. Not shocked, though, right?
It's a divisional game. To me, a divisional game. I don't care where it's played.
They've already beaten Philly once this year.
They've already done it once. And people will say, well, Kenny Pickett played a lot of that game. I don't care. They won. And they won in Philly, I believe. Or no, that was in Washington, I believe that. But if I were ranking these, I do think that the Eagles would have the highest percentage. I would actually have the Bills over the Chiefs. So I think the Bills, they're not daunted by going into Arrowhead. They've done that. They've been there. They've played. And I don't think the Chiefs, we all say like, well, they just keep finding ways to win. Eventually, they're going to find themselves having to play in a different way. And there were times in that game I thought Houston was going to pull off the upset. And if it weren't for some of the calls that we already talked about. But let me ask you this question as to piggyback the topic there. I want you to pick not just what Super Bowl matchup you want to see, but what do you think would be the best Super Bowl game out of the 4 remaining teams?
Well, Philadelphia and Buffalo, or Washington and Buffalo. I'm all in on either one of those games. I think that from a national narrative perspective, Washington-Buffalo would be amazing. Because here you have this underdog Commanders team with the rookie quarterback and all of that versus the forever suffering Buffalo Bills and their fan base. And it would be a really compelling matchup between those two teams. Philly Buffalo stylistically, I think would make for a phenomenal football game because you would just have so many great angles and that fast physical Buffalo defense against that Philly run offense and Josh Allen against that really good Philadelphia secondary. I mean, I just think that there's a lot of really cool angles there. But if I had to root for one, I think Washington Buffalo would be an awesome Super Bowl.
Yeah, there would be a ton of storylines. There would be a lot of excitement there. I'm going to say I'm rooting for, and I think this is going to be the best matchup as well. I'm rooting for Philly Buffalo because either of those teams, whatever. I just don't want the Chiefs. That's really it. Like as long as it's not the Chiefs.
Anybody with the Chiefs. Any combination that doesn't involve Kansas City.
Exactly. So I think we all have Chiefs fatigue, but that's interesting. We'll talk about that next week after the conference championship games are done, and we'll have plenty of time to dissect those. But let's go to our player profile. You want to talk about Matthew Stafford, who I thought had a tremendous game on Sunday in Philadelphia. I don't think he was the reason that the Rams lost the game. I don't know how much he has left in the tank and how much he has left in Los Angeles, but Coach, go ahead, talk about Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, I bring him up because his comments after the game were that he's going to take some time off and consider his path forward and talk to his wife and et cetera, et cetera. And it'll be very interesting to see what he does. I don't know if he's coming back to LA. I don't know if he's moving on. It wouldn't be stunning if he retired. Matthew Stafford will be 38 years old next season. He has been in the league for a long time. And he's been really just one of the great guys in the NFL for a long time. He left Detroit with a phenomenal legacy. Obviously didn't have a ton of on-field success as a team, but he holds every record that franchise has for quarterbacks. He did a tremendous amount of community work. He and his wife left behind an awesome foundation there. They've already been heavily involved in trying to raise money for the people out in Los Angeles suffering from the wildfires. I mean, he just seems like a dude you want to root for. He pulled off another phenomenal no-look pass against the Eagles. I don't know if you guys saw that. That is a mind-boggling thing to me that he's doing these. Just not in preseason games, but in these phenomenal postseason games. And so, I'm as a football fan, he's a guy I always root for. So I hope he comes back. He's entertaining to watch. But if we've seen the last of Matthew Stafford, then hats off to him for a hell of a career.
There's one play sequence, whatever you want to call it, when he was in Detroit that made me really enjoy Matthew Stafford more. So when he was a rookie and he had Calvin Johnson there, and then you have Megatron, I mean, he's going to make anyone look good. But there was a play that illustrated his toughness, and it was a play against Cleveland. I'm sure you've probably seen this. NFL films there. He was mic'd up. They're driving down the field, the Detroit Lions against the Cleveland Browns. They score a touchdown, and they need a conversion to win the game. And he gets leveled on the touchdown throw, and he dislocates his shoulder, and he barely gets to the sideline, and he is grimacing in pain. They end up having to call timeouts, and he goes back in, and they're like, he can't throw it. He can't throw it. He can't even lift his arm. He does throw it. They complete it. They win the game. And it was just like, man, that guy's tough as nails, because he dislocated his throwing shoulder. It wasn't his non-throwing shoulder. But no, Matthew Stafford has always been entertaining. He's a guy that, hey, love him or hate him, he's going to sling it. He's going to sling the rock. I think those are few and far between anymore. He's kind of like, I feel like he's the last of a dying breed of gunslinger that's willing to go down shooting in a blaze of glory. But I thought he played a good game in Philadelphia. I don't think they lost because of him, like I already said. But Matthew Stafford, if he calls it a career, it's been a hell of a career. I'm glad he finally won a Super Bowl a few years back. So, all right, Coach. I want to give you a chance to plug your Call Sheet Daily podcast. I've been enjoying it. Hopefully other people have as well. Why don't you go ahead and do that?
Yeah. So today, Tuesday, is we're looking at how the 12-team playoff turn out in college football. You know, it's our new normal show, and the new normal is we now have a real, actual college football playoff. And what were some of the good, some of the bad? We'll revisit as you and I are recording. Obviously, the national championship game is about a couple hours from kickoff, so we'll touch on a little bit of that. Wednesday will be Whiteboard Wednesday, where we get to X and O some of it. So I'll probably pick something I see in tonight's game and bring on another coach. We'll talk about it on Wednesday. So I'm really enjoying this daily format.
Awesome. I've been enjoying it too. They're not long podcasts, anywhere from like 15 to 20 minutes. So during your lunch break, you can learn a little something about the game and educate yourselves. But that's it for me. Make sure you check out all of our work at the Steel Curtain Network if you're a Steelers fan. Other than that, we'll be back next week to talk about the conference championship games and see what the Super Bowl matchup is. Coach, as always, thanks for your time. We'll talk next week. Take it easy.